Just as an introduction, I've heard this from Rapam Zechron Levrach. He told me once that his greatest pleasure is learning halacha be'iyun, because there are many shilas, and especially the increase of contemporary issues. And when you learn halacha properly and you understand the background, you understand a little of the sugya, then you could really have a little more guidance in how to apply it in modern day living as well. Now, sechita doesn't seem to be a modern day shaila, but as Rabbi Gad has been mentioned, alluded to, that there are certain questions that are more of contemporary nature, as we'll see. And I'm going to start with two questions that I witnessed personally. It was a fruit salad on the table by a Suda, and as usual is the case, there was some juice that had accumulated from the various watermelon, cantaloupe, honeydew, and the pomegranate. So someone poured the juice into his cup and drank it. And someone saw it and said, "That's Chilul Shabbos. Don't you know Mashkin Shazavu is also? You're not allowed to drink that juice." So it was interesting that he was wrong, and I'll soon say why. And I was thinking, if you don't know what you're talking about, at least don't advertise it, because that juice indeed is mutter. I'm Ashkin Shazavu. So that's our agenda for this afternoon. Another question that I also witnessed, someone came to a chasana, to a Sheva Brachos, a Shabbat Sheva Brachos, and there was a very nice piece of fish on the table. The caterer made an elegant display. There was a piece of lemon next to the fish. And the person was horrified. They're giving us lemon. They want us to squeeze lemons. Don't you know lemon is asa to squeeze on Shabbos? That's also something that if you know the sugya, it's not so simple. So let's learn the sugya. We'll be zeich to learn the sugya, and we'll see this and many other questions. A very brief introduction to sechita. Sechita is not one of the lametes malachas. You look through the Siddur, the pas, you won't find the word sechita. What you will find is the malacha of mefarek. In the Mishkan, after they cut the wheat, they had to separate the chaff from the food product. They trampled on it, and then they had to separate it. The malacha of mefarek is separating wheat or any food from its encasement, from where it evolved, from where it grew. So an accurate definition of mefarek is separating food from its enclosure and encasement. In the case of the Mishkan, it was the wheat in the chaff. The Gemara, actually the Mishnah in Shabbos Kuf Mem Gimel, extends that to the sugya of this early afternoon. Ein soichlin esaperis lahaitzi mehen mashkin. You're now allowed to take a grape and squeeze it and make grape juice. Why? What's wrong with that? The grapes are not muktzah, it's not bishul. So Rashi explains the Havali Mefarek, the Tolda Kedisha. This is a Tolda, actually the word is Teloda, which is sort of a subset of Mefarek. But if you think about our definition of mefarek, separating something from its encasement, that describes sechita. Juice grows in the grapes, as juice grows in many fruits and vegetables. And by squeezing it, you're extracting the juice, or perhaps even producing the juice from where it was housed in as it grew. So basically, mefarek is separating juice from its base. And I should mention, although it's a telada, not an av malacha, but it's still a deraisa. Telada and av are both deraisa. The only difference is if it's one of the lamites malachas proper, a av or telada. So we're dealing with the serious malacha deraisa when a person makes grape juice on Shabbos. A different example, which sounds outdated but is extremely relevant, is milking a cow. Now, a cow is not a fruit, but then again, the milk is encased in the cow, and milking is a malacha deraisa of mefarek. Now, you think this is, why am I mentioning this? Who has cows today? But you go to Eretz Yisrael, they're from a kibbutzim, and they struggle with this question. When you have a Shabbos, a Yom Tiv, and even a 3-day Yom Tiv, which could be in Eretz Yisrael, when you have a Rosh Hashanah Thursday and Friday going into Shabbos. So they do have 3-day Yom Tiv on Rosh Hashanah at least. And they have this major problem of cows that cannot be left unmilked for 3 days. So the poskim discussed it. The Chazon Ish gave them direction, but these things are an egeya whether we like it or not. I'll tell you a fascinating child that resurfaced recently. Just this past Rosh Hashanah, I received as a gift from someone who comes to my share a honey for Rosh Hashanah, but it came in the original honey comb. The bees produced the honey in the honeycomb, and he sent me a elaborate dish of honey with the honeycomb in it. Mishnah later in Shin Chaf Aleph Sifkat and Memvav and Memches says that extracting honey from a honeycomb is also Malacha Deraisa. It's the same concept of mefarek, separating from its encasement. I should mention that although we're talking Hilchos Shabbos, today is the Hilchos Shabbos sugya, but as the poskim say, the Shmir Shabbos in the beginning of Perikei points this out emphatically, Sechita is asa on Yom Tiv, no different than Shabbos. Even though you're allowed to bake and cook and carry on Yom Tiv, but that's malacha from Lisha onward on Yom Tiv is mutter. But mefarek is before Lisha, and therefore Yom Tiv, the sugya of Sechita applies equally as in Shabbos. So besides 52 days of the week, Shabbos that this year is Negeya to, we're extending that somewhat, 12 days of Yom Tiv. It also applies this sugya. I remember very fondly growing up as a young child when people didn't have bought products on Pesach like we have today, and everybody typically made their own orange juice. You took juice oranges, you squeezed it. That's a wonderful idea for Chalamoid Pesach. But making orange juice on Pesach is an issa, and that is that issa of mefarek, which is also on Yom Tov as well. So basically, we expanded our horizon. It's not just Shabbos, it's Yom Tov as well. And now the question is, so how do we apply this Lamaisa? So first of all, let's realize that we're dealing with a serious issue. I'm going to tell you a fascinating story, and hopefully we will come back to this. Reb Shlomo Zalman once met Rabbi Chaim Noah, one of the Gedolei HaPoskim in Eretz Yisrael, who occasionally released a publication of pertinent halachas, and he wrote in it, you're not allowed to squeeze grapes to make grape juice on Shabbos. Shlomo Zalman was surprised, and he asked him, that's a basic halacha that every Jew knows. Sechita is also. Why do you have to write a halacha that's limited to specific halacha, and you write this halacha as if no one knows it? So he told him, I'm going to tell you a lesson. I'll teach you a lesson. I was talking to a Jew Friday night in shul, and the Yid tells me, okay, I'm going home to be Mekayim Din Gemara, Gemara in Bava Basra, Soichet Adam Eshkol Anovim, V'oima Olav Kiddush Hayoim. Gemara says you're allowed to make fresh grape juice and use it for Kiddush. So he understood it, that you're allowed to squeeze grapes on Shabbos and make Kiddush. Chaim Noah says, what are you doing? You're making grape juice on Shabbos and Malacha Deraisa of Sechita. But the person learned the Gemara, of course, incorrectly, and he thought the Gemara means squeeze it on Friday night. So he said, therefore, you have to tell people you want to make fresh grape juice, that's fine, make it Friday afternoon. I must tell you that grape juice, if the Yid made it, would be asa not only to make, but also to have anah, because that's a Chilul Shabbos, and Ma'aseh Shabbos is also b'anah. Unless you go with the sheet that the Shai gets mutter, you'll look in the beginning of Shin Yud Ches, Ayin Sham. But it's just reminds us of the importance of learning and applying what we learn in Halacha L'Maisa. So let's apply this concept on a practical level. You will have a piece of fish, or as Rabbi Gadaza mentioned, you have a salad. You want to add a little, spike to it. You want to add some lemon juice to your fish. Are you allowed to take a lemon and squeeze the lemon onto the fish or into the salad? So the truth is, we have to know one thing before we apply our sugya. If you look in the Gemara, Daf Kuf Mem Hey, Midaraisa, you're only chayav sechita on zeisim v'anavim bilvad. Zeisim is olives, anavim, of course, are grapes. Other fruits are not included in the deraisa of sechita. That means a lemon would be l'chayr mutter to squeeze. What's the pshat? Why is it limited to only lemon and olives? So Rashi says, because it's not the derech to squeeze other fruits. And you have to realize Rashi, like many Dairis, lives in abject poverty. They didn't have the liberty of making juice, cranberry juice and pomegranate juice. You had a fruit, you ate it. Zeisim anovim are grown to make juice, wine of grapes, olive oil. The olive oil was made, the olive was grown to produce olive oil. So Rashi says that it's not the derech. Oh, that's a general heta in Kol HaTerakula, specifically Shabbos. That if it's not the derech, it's mutter. That's the simple hezbah why it's mutter, it's not the derech. In fact, Taisus Rid stresses, Ein l'chashinui gadol mizeh. It was so far-fetched that a person will make cranberry juice that it was just not normal. The Rashba and the Ritva have a different hezbah. And this is going to be very crucial for our sugya for today, that the Issa is creating a juice, creating an entity. The Issa of Sechita is creating a juice, as we explained, extracting it from its encasement. When you make juice of wine or olive oil, that's a juice. But other fruits and vegetables, since it's not the derech, even the juice is considered an oichel. You didn't get past first base. When you squeeze grapes, you made a juice. When you squeeze other fruits, loichashiv mashke el oichel, it still has the status and the identity of an oichel. In other words, and the Rosh highlights this when he says there's no shem mashka on other fruits. Now, I know this sounds strange to us because we are very busy with juices. We'll soon get back to that. But in time to the Rishonim, as the Ureim stresses in Reishai and Dalit, Vanishar Tavayu Oichel Ninhu. You didn't do the malacha. The malacha is creating a juice, and you didn't create a juice. You squeezed pomegranate, and now you have a pomegranate. It doesn't have a shem mashke on that juice. The Ran, in a few places, adds a little of a twist to it. It's a beautiful hezbah. And he says that other Jews don't have Shem juice. And his proof is, we know there are, Hilchos Tumah, there are 7 mashkois. Yad, Chad, Dam is the Rosh Tevis, Yayin, Dam, Shemen, Cholav, Dvash, and Mayim. Did you notice? Whatever Sechita is also is one of the mashkois. Yayin, Shemen, Cholav, as we explained, Dvash. But pomegranate juice doesn't have a shem mashke, not one of the 7 mashkois. If it's not from the 7 mashkois, obviously, then it will not be considered the issa of sechita. So this is basically what we developed in the sugya. And that's why the Shulchan Aruch begins in Siman Shin Chaf, that the issa, the raisa of sechita, is limited to zeisim vanovim, and tusim v'rimoinim, tusim are berries, rimoinim is pomegranates, are also midrabanan, because it's not a deraisa, because it's not zeisim vanovim. But then again, it is too similar to sechita to be mutter entirely. So therefore, it's on a second level. Tusim v'rimoinim is also midrabanan. Now, what's interesting, the Shulchan Aruch continues, Shar kol peiros, other fruits or vegetables might be mutter, because it's not the derech. The question is, today, we live in a totally different society, and we squeeze so many other fruits and vegetables. Does halacha change? Now, Khalil, halacha doesn't change, but halacha is very responsive to the social needs and the social habits that we adapt. Today, people cultivate and they grow special juice oranges. It's grown to make juice. How does the halacha respond to juice oranges that are squeezed? Is that a halacha deraisa? So it really depends on the reason that we just explained. If the issa is not the derech, this is the derech. If the reason is it doesn't have a shem mashke, it's only 7 mashkois, it might be probable that orange juice is still only an issa d'rabbanan. And the emes is, I saw a number of poskim that feel that if it's the derech to do it, that's the sole criterion in this context. And therefore, squeezing juice oranges would be a melacha deraisa. I so called Rabbi Yashiv, Mr. Karel, it's the Oznidru as a tshuva. Others say it's not a deraisa. And again, I would believe they are leaning on the svar of the Ran. Megadim says this, that it has to be zayim ashkois. But definitely squeezing any fruits or vegetables is minimally an issa d'Rabbanan, especially the ones that today we do squeeze. Don't forget, we have seen an increase in juice production. We make juice out of cranberries and out of pomegranate and so many other fruits and vegetables that one heard of years ago. So every squeezing is suspect to be minimally an issa d'Rabbanan. And according to some, if the derech is that, if that has become the social norm, it would be no different than zeis v'anoven, and it could even be potentially a deraisa. To apply this to our question, someone has a very nice fruit bowl with cut up melons and cut up fruits, and now he has a exquisite juice remaining on the bottom. Can he drink that juice? So this is the second half of the Mishnah that we began with. You're now let us squeeze zeis v'anovim. Im yatsu mi'atzmon asurin. Even if you didn't extract, you didn't squeeze the juice, it oozed out on its own, it's still asa to drink that olive or grape juice. Why? Zabrashi gezeira shema yischait lechatchila. You might today just drink the juice innocently, but that might lead you to a serious error, and tomorrow squeezing zeis v'anovim to produce juice. And that's in Shulchan Aruch, Shin Chaf, Sif Aleph. The obvious question is, does that apply to our case? We have a fruit juice that was just produced by all this fruits and melons that was sitting in the bowl? Not at all. Because if you notice, the Mishnah says that olives or grapes that oozed out is asa. That's asa because it might result in a melacha deraisa. But our melons, watermelon, cantaloupe, honeydew, all these things is definitely not a melacha deraisa even today. So it can never result in a melacha deraisa. Maybe there's no issa in having the juice that no melacha was done, that it was out. In other words, our very case of the juice that remains from a melon salad should be mutter. And if you say that, you mechaven to the halacha. The Gemara Taka says, and that's in Shulchan Aruch, Tusim v'rimaynim asa l'soichtam, im yatsu me'atzmon, if it oozed that on its own, im oimdim la'achila, if you designated these melons for achila, which we did, you wanted to have a melon salad, a fruit salad, mutter, you're allowed to enjoy the juice that was just freshly produced. So our situation that I witnessed, where someone innocently drank the juice from a melon, from a fruit salad, would be perfectly mutter, and the person that gave a musa should ask him achila and should learn halacha a little more clearly, because this would be a case of yatsu me'atzmon, of ayman lachila, and it's definitely mutter. If someone has juice remaining from juice oranges that he ate, okay, you could talk about it. That might be asa, because if you assume that juice oranges have the status of zeis v'anovim, so the resulting juice would be no different. So that l'chayra is simple and pashut. Now let's be a little more aggressive and let's try to find the nature of someone that wants to have a little flavoring to his salmon, his fish, or his salad. Is it mutter to squeeze a lemon onto his food? So you're probably wondering, what's the difference? If squeezing is asa, so be doing it onto a food, how does that affect the question? Why should it be any different? So here we come to the beauty of learning halacha. And as I told you, the side that we have to understand is that the issa is clearly defined as producing a mashka. And we're going to highlight that because that's the crux of the issue. By squeezing, you're producing a mashka. It is logical to say, if at the end of the day, after all your squeezing was done, you didn't produce a mashka, then you didn't violate the issa. The issa is halachically defined and described as producing a mashka. If you squeeze it onto a food, there is no discernible mashka. You didn't produce a mashka. If you didn't produce a mashka, what's the issa? And who says this? Not me. This is a Gemara. The Gemara in Kuf Mem Dalet Amud Beis. I'm sure you learned it together with Rabbi Gottesman. Soichet Adam Eshkel Shalanovim. You're allowed to squeeze grapes, and the emergency bell starting to ring. You're allowed to squeeze grapes. What are you talking about? Zeisim Vanovim. That's the Melacha Deraisa. Continue the Gemara. L'toich hakideira. You're allowed to squeeze it into a pot. Obviously, the pot has food in it. Abaloi l'soich haka'or. You're allowed to squeeze grapes, which is surprising, shocking is a better word, into a pot, but not a plate. Now, right away, Rashi explains, kedera is lav dafka pot, but it means there's food in it. Ora is a plate that's empty. Now, obviously, if you have a plate that has a piece of salmon on it, it's no different than kedera and it's mut. So the concept that we presented, squeezing grapes onto food, is a Gemara, and it's mutter. How could it be mutter? How could you squeeze grapes, which is Melacha Deraisa? So Rashi's words are music to our ears. Again, the key word here is you're producing an oichel. When you squeeze grapes and you make grape juice, you produce an oichel. You produce the mashka, I'm sorry. When you squeeze olives and you made olive oil, you produce the mashka. But here, you squeeze grapes or you squeeze lemon onto a food, its status is that of an oichel, and it never changes identity. And if you didn't produce a mashka, there is nothing to asa this particular act. It began as an oichel, and it concluded as an oichel. So our definition is giving us quite some mileage. It has to be a production of a mashka, which of course does not apply when you're doing it into an oichel. Now this is wonderful, and according to this, there will be no problem even squeezing grapes or olives onto a food. However, there's a sheet of Rabbeinu Chananel on the side of the page in the Gemara that we don't paskin like this Gemara. As the Gemara said it, then the Gemara has the right to say it, but that's not halacha l'maisa. According to that, there'll be no heta squeezing lemon onto a piece of fish. But how do we paskin? The Pash of the Gemara seems to be mutter. The Rabbeinu Chananel is machmir. So the Rosh in Chav Beis Aleph in the Chuvas, Yadata. Someone asked me this question. You know, there's a big machlokes rishonim. The Rach holds it's asa. Mi yachnis roishe bein aharim. Who could get involved with the Rabbeinu Chananel's apsak? In other words, he might be a lone voice, but he's a Rishon. Rabbeinu Chananel's a giant. I can't to stick my head into that danger. And then he concludes with a milder lashon. V'amachmir tavai olav bracha. So he goes from I'm scared to be mekel to it's praiseworthy to be mekel. That's quite a change in lashon for a Rishon. From who's going to put his head into this dangerous situation to a machmir tavai olav bracha. So we have a pashtus that you're allowed to squeeze grapes onto food. Rabbeinu Chananel is machmir, and the Rosh says hamachmir tavai olav bracha. The Shulchan Aruch in Siv Dalid says you're allowed to squeeze grapes onto food and doesn't even mention Rabbeinu Chananel. So apparently he did not find it problematic. You're allowed to do it, and we don't pass like Rabbeinu Chananel. In Siv Zayin, he gives Rabbeinu Chananel an honorable mention. He says it's mutter, Rabbeinu Chananel is machmir. So here we have a important concept that we have to apply. Squeezing grapes onto food is mutam yikidin. Rabbeinu Chananel is machmir, and the Shulchan Aruch recommends, like the Rosh, hamachma tavei olav bracha. But, and here again is the beauty of learning halacha properly, does that mean that we can't squeeze our lemon onto a fish? Not necessarily. Because the starting point of Rabbeinu Chananel was squeezing grapes onto a food. Grapes is a melacha deraisa. Lemon, as we'll soon see, is not a melacha deraisa necessarily. It's not zeisim van oven. They didn't have lemons in the times of the Gemara. We'll soon see why. But this is basically why the Paiskim say even the Machma Tavai Ola Bracha says the Chayei Adam was only by something that potentially is a Melacha Deraisa, based on Vanav. So I saw this in other Paiskim as well, that you're allowed, in fact, to squeeze lemon onto a fish. At least the Rabbeinu Hananel's objection might not apply. Now, plus you have to realize the Pasha is not like Rabbeinu Hananel, so it's a pretty, it would make sense that it's mutter to squeeze your lemon onto the fish. Now, the Chazon Ish has an interesting observation. Since the whole het is predicated on the fact that there was never a production of liquid, because he went from the lemon straight into the fish. The Chazon Ish, but there was an interim period. You squeezed it, and it went through the air, depending on how high you held it, but it definitely went through the air until it went into the eichel. Why don't we say at that point it was a shem mashke? So then you made a mashke, and then subsequently went into an eichel. So the Chazon Ish says, "Kiva de soife lanuach b'seicha eichel lechol alav shem mashke." In other words, it's, I guess in our yeshivish children would like to say, it's not a matziv. When you squeeze it into food, it goes from food into food. Now, the fact that for a millisecond it was a mashke, but that's immaterial. That's not a status. That's not it's not an identity. It's just on its way down. Soife lanuach has the status of a non-mokai. The important question here is that what does it mean? Why is it mutter l'soich oichel? I mean, let's be honest. You squeeze lemon onto a piece of fish, it doesn't get totally absorbed in the fish. Some of it goes in, some of it goes on the plate. So this we have to look a little bit at Hilchos Yom Tov, because there in Hilchos Yom Tov, this is a much more pressing issue. Because as I told you, when you have a farm, you have a kibbutz, and it's Shabbos, Yom Tov, 2-day Yom Tov, 3-day Yom Tov, whatever the situation is, you can't leave cows unattended for these days. So when they have to milk cows, they rely, amongst other terms, on squeezing it into a food or into another item that is not a shem of Melacha Deraisa. And in Tov Kuf Hey Sif Aleph, the Shulchan Aruch says squeezing something onto crumbs, even since it initially gets absorbed in the crumbs, even though later it resurfaces, but since when you squeezed it, it was not a shem schiita, not a shem mashke, so it sort of never had an identity of malach at that time. And then the fact that a little later it resurfaces doesn't give it the status of a mashke. So here we could say that basically the heta is because you never created a mashke. Thank you. And therefore, if you never created a mashke, there's no issa. Question, and again, I think you'll appreciate this question. Okay, so I got it. I need lemon juice, and I'll do it right, squeeze it onto a piece of fish. Is there a different problem? And that the problem is called boira. I'm squeezing, and for me, the lemon itself is like the psilus, the juice is the eichel, and I'm doing it biyadayim. I'm doing an act. Would that be a problem of schiita, of boira, I'm sorry? So if you're doing it to eat it now, boira, that you're doing eichel mitayach psilus would be mutter. But let's say I'm squeezing lemon into the salad Friday night for the Shabbos day suit. I'm afraid I'll forget to do it tomorrow, so I'm doing it Friday night. So now it's boira for tomorrow. Even if you're taking the good, it still should be awesome. So Rabbi says, since we understood that the heta of squeezing a lemon into salad is because it's an eichel, so guess what? It was never boira. The lemon is the eichel. The juice is the same eichel. It doesn't have a status of two minim. The juice and the lemon is one big eichel. The heta of squeezing that it should not be a schiita is because it is not a mashke, it's an eichel. And that applies equally to the issa of boira. It's one big eichel, and there was never a transgression of the issa of boira. Question. Someone is in the mood of very freshly squeezed orange juice, but you can't do it, not on Shabbos or Yom Tov. He has an idea. He'll cut up a quarter of an orange, put it next to his mouth, and extract the juice, not by squeezing, but by sucking it with his mouth and his teeth. So he'll keep his lips basically on the lemon and suck out the juice. So the truth is he is extracting the juice, but definitely not a ma'aseh sechita. How do we advise this person as far as the permissibility of that act? So the truth is, I started thinking that in Hilchos brachas we have a similar question. Kive'ega in Reish Beis Sif Ches quotes a Pri Chadash. The person that does just that and sucks out juice from an orange, the bracha he would make on that juice is a Boyer Priya Eitz, because it still has the status of a fruit. If you squeeze it and made it into a juice, it changed its identity and became a juice. But sucking from a fruit has the halacha of a fruit. Other poskim hold no. You sucked out the juice, that's a shackle. But the emes is, it is sensible to say that since there was no real production of juice, it went from fruit into your mouth. It was at no time did it have a identity of juice as itself. Maybe that would be why it's mutter. Or you'll say, what are you talking about? In my mouth, it's juice. So the Areim, the Beis Yosef quotes the Areim that says that it's holds that sucking out the juice is a serious problem, cheshashani for a chatos. Apparently he held that the juice in your mouth has a shem juice, and therefore that would be awesome. The Bala Ita strongly disagrees, and he says that there is no shem sechita when it never is on its own. It doesn't have a shem mashke in one's mouth, and it's basically never at one point considered sechita. The orange is in your hand, it goes into your mouth, and it basically says that there is no time that we could say, there's the sechita. It's in a certain sense very similar to squeezing onto food. The issa is creating a mashka, and this person, in fact, did not create a mashka. How do we paskin? Don't forget the Yereim said, I'm chayshashani, I'm concerned about a chi of chatos. So the Mechaber does not mention anything at all. I guess he just ignores it. The Ramah in the Sif Aleph says the issa is squeezing, but to be mitzvah, to suck out the juice, min ha'anovim, even from grapes, would be okay, is mutter. Yes, the yesh oisrim limtzais bepeh mi'anovim ukiyotze b'zeh. So the Shulchan Aruch ignores the issue. The Ramah seems to be mekel v'yesh oisrim. Again, like sort of an honorable mention. The Mishnah Berurah paskins that regarding Zeisen Vanovim, since it's a Safek Deraisa, don't forget the Yereim's called the Cheshani for Chiyuv Chatas, you better avoid it. But other fruits is fine. Because in the worst scenario, other fruits is midrabanan. So our orange question, we don't have to be chayshes, we don't have to be convinced that it's a Melacha Deraisa. He's mentioned earlier by juice oranges, this discussion, but a regular orange, it's not grown to produce juice. It would be an Issa D'Rabbanan, but not more. So then, sucking out the juice would be okay. Just this past Yom Tov, someone asked me, and he showed it to me, in fact, they have now for children, I guess it's a few years already, that you want to give a child something healthy, a healthy snack. I'm talking about a young child, very young child. They have a very small little mesh bag, and he puts like a piece of watermelon in it, and you put it in the child's mouth, and the child sucks it and extracts the juice. It keeps the child busy, and it's, again, a pretty healthy snack as opposed to a candy or the like. Can you give this to a child on Shabbos or Yom Tov? Now, don't forget, the child shelo yagi l'chinuch, but the fact that father's putting it into his mouth, if it is a violation of sechita, then it will be safina and biadayim. You are supplying to albeit a young child, an issa on Shabbos. So I was thinking, is this totally in our original shaila? Sucking out juice is basically mutter. No. If we hold like the Re'im, it's a problem. But since, as we saw, the Ramah says you could be makel to suck out juice, so that would be mutter, the case of the meshbeg. But the truth is, the case of the meshbeg is mutter, even according to the Re'im. The Re'im holds its asa. Mr. Brewer points out the Re'im holds its asa if you hold it in your hand and you suck it out. If you put the fruit into your mouth, fully in your mouth, and suck out the juice when it's in your mouth, even the Re'im holds its mutter. So our meshbeg would be mutter, even according to the Re'im, and basically that would be okay. The last part of this year is a little bit about citrus fruits, particularly lemons, as we'll see, but not exclusively a lemon issue. And I want to just be magdim, an historical note, and this is what someone told me. If someone has better information, I'd love to hear from you. I was a bit perturbed that we don't find fruits of lemons in Gemara. The Rush is one of the first that speak about it. Well, they didn't have these type of fruits. So someone told me no. They told me very clearly. He says that the main fruits, especially in Eretz Yisrael, were the esrig, the citron fruit, the pamela, and the mandarin. 3 fruits that they had. All of the fruits that we have today, lemons, clementines, oranges, and basically all other fruits are a hybrid, a murkav. They took the original esrig, pamela, and mandarin, and they grafted it. So in the Gemara's times, it wasn't done. It's not so plushy. Of course, you're not allowed to do it. The question is, if a guy does it, it's a whole discussion for itself. But they didn't have this because it involved a violation of an Issa Hakbaba. But Lamaisa, we have lemons and we have other fruits, and the question is, how does Allah respond to the newer fruits that we don't see in the Gemara any guidance, but we have, of course, need that vital guidance. So the truth is that lemons is one fruit that is almost synonymous with juice. No one bites into a lemon. A lemon is basically produced to make juice. And that's why the Rush in the tshuva that we mentioned earlier, Chav Beis, and I quote, Shesha'alta al schitas lemonish. Are you allowed to squeeze a lemon on Shabbos? I want to have lemon juice. Forget about onto fish that's mutter. I want to make lemon juice. I want to have a drink. Nira shehein b'chlal shar perish shemutal l'sachtam. You're allowed to squeeze it l'chatchila. She'ein derech klal lischeit lemonish l'tzarech mashke elo tzarech eichel. He's saying there's no problem of schitta by lemons at all, because it's not the derech to make juice. It's only a food. Elo eichel. Now, again, this is music to our ears, because the definition, the guiding definition of schitta is you're producing a mashka. And the Rush is asserting that lemon juice doesn't have a shem mashka. It's used to flavor your salad, to flavor your salmon. It's used to give flavor to foods, but it's not a mashka. So if at the end of the day you didn't produce a mashka, then you didn't do an issa. The Radvaz, from the earliest Achronim, Chelik Aleph Siman Yud, adds a little bit more hezva. Schitas halemon, af agav she'oisen oisei mashka, ein osir l'shtoisei k'moishehu, el l'tabel by oichel. They didn't drink lemonade. They produced lemon juice to give flavor to various foods. So the lemon juice didn't have a status of a mashka. It was an enhancer of an oichel. And therefore, there was no violation of the issa of schitta. And he proves this from the lashon of the Rush, that's what the Rush means. In other words, of course they made lemon juice, but it was only used as a food, and therefore it had the identity and the halachic status of a food. That was what the Rush says, and the Radvaz writes it. Radvaz was one of the earliest Achronim. The Beis Yosef, was also from the earliest Achronim. He has a problem. He says, times have changed. Social habits have changed. Correct, the Beis Yosef in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, where some Gedolim lived, notably the Rambam, Noigin lechol lischait lemonish, to make juice, lemonade. And the way he describes it, They fill up barrels of this lemon to drink. Why isn't it also? Because they were not using it to flavor salmon. They were using it to drink. Lishtois letainug. What about schiita? Says the Beis Yosef, an incredible yisoid. The efshad loy mitzah ella kishenoisen mei schitas apeh kishishoisen mei schitas apeh beloy taruvais mashkaach. Says the Beis Yosef, the issa of schiita is when you produce a drink that is consumed independently. Grape juice, olive oil is consumed as is. But no one drinks plain lemon juice. You have to flavor, you have to add other juices, sugar, whatever it is. But that's interesting. Lemon is the one drink that you can't drink as is. You don't drink plain lemon juice. So that disqualifies it from being a schiita. Very interesting. Think about it. All other drinks, pomegranate and cranberry and peach and any other juice, you could drink as it is. Lemon is the notable exception. And then the Beis Yosef adds another explanation that has a tremendous impact on halacha l'maisa. Inami, the only issa of schiita is if you have a schiita that it is when you squeeze it out and you keep it as it is. But if the minig is to squeeze it and into something else, they didn't just make lemon juice, they squeezed it into something else. They never made lemon juice independent and then added it like the first teretz. But they never ever made plain lemon juice. Soichtav meimav levad means they're only squeezing it as it is and into a barrel. They never produced lemon juice. They added lemon juice to the drinks. So there are two svaras. They sound similar, but they're not. The first svar is you don't drink lemonade as it is, and second svar is you don't bottle lemon juice as it is. It's squeezed directly into the juice. Now, someone asked me an interesting question. Wine also, in times of the Gemara, was not consumed as is. You had to add water. Plain wine was too strong. The answer is, but at the end of the day, when you added water, then it was wine. You made wine. But when you added other flavorings to lemonade, you made punch, and it wasn't any longer a lemon beverage. This is all what the Beis Yosef tries to justify minig Mitzrayim in his times. Comes again the Chai Yodam, and Mr. Brewer quotes it and says, Tzarech Ian Godel. We have a major problem with our lemon juice. Because today it's bottled, and as he writes it, it's malm chavius lemeyos. They bottle lemon juice, hundreds and thousands of barrels. It's no longer the reality of what the Beis Yosef describes. Today, lemon juice is a very precious commodity. It's sold as is. So Mr. Brewer says the only eitzah would be if you go back to the original het of the Gemara, and that is squeeze the lemon onto a food. Now, you're going to squeeze the lemon onto your salmon, you can have it with your punch. So he says, squeeze the lemon onto sugar, which is an oichel. We'll soon see if that's true. And then that justifies the squeezing, and then add the sugar with the lemon juice into your tea. Now, this is wonderful. But the question is, why don't we have the second teretz of the Beis Yosef? That, because even today, the first teretz of the Beis Yosef, I should say, because even today, no one drinks plain lemon juice. The Beis Yosef had two terutzim. Maybe his primary teretz was that you don't drink plain lemon juice. So the fact that we produce lemon juice in lawful revavos does not make it a drink that is consumed independently. And that's why the Mechaba and Sivas mutta lischait lemonish, and it seems Zakta Magen Avram that it's mutta even if you squeeze it and you make lemon juice, because it's never drunk as it is. However, the Mishnah Berurah, as I mentioned, is machmir. The Markatzir B'Ayin Kevemdin, in his note on the Shulchan Aruch, is highly critical. And it lasais mi lemonis mashka goma b'Shabbos levois atzmoin is a Melacha Deraisa, and he's very critical of the Poskim, including Magen Avraham and the Shulchan Aruch that are Mekel. Lamaisa, as we said, the Shulchan Aruch is Mekel to squeeze lemon, the Mishnah, the Markatzia, Amachmir, and we try to follow the Mishnah's Psak. So let's be very clear. At the end of the day, if someone squeezes lemons, you can't give him skila, obviously, because he has a Shulchan Aruch to be Mekel. But we don't do that. What do? We squeeze lemon onto food. And even the Rabbeinu Hananel would agree, because as we said, the Rabbeinu Hananel's restriction was only by Zeis and Vanovim, and lemon is not yet on the level of Zeis and Vanovim. Squeezing lemon onto a food, onto a salad, onto a fish is okay. Squeezing a tomato onto XL, somebody asked me this question, so now you have tomato juice on XL, is even more mutter, because tomato is not in all the derech to be nischat. I mean, some people have tomato juice, but that's pretty much outdated, but it's certainly not as challenging as lemon that has become a very prominent juice. The Radvaz, as I mentioned, discusses lemon, and he says, but if you really want to be safe, squeeze the lemon onto the sugar and then add it. The Mishnah quotes this as well. And in fact, I once saw a Remes, one of the earlier poskim, says the word sulam, samach lamed mem, is the order of how to do it. First, get the samach is sugar. Then you get your lemon, lamid, and mem, then you get the mayim, the tea, or whatever beverage you have. You have to follow that order. First, you get the sugar, add the lemon to the sugar, and then you add this lemon-sugar combination into the tea. There's a big problem with the heta of squeezing lemon into sugar to put into a tea. And that is, sugar, as we know, is a soluble. When you put sugar into your hot tea, it liquefies. In fact, when we learn Hilchos Shabbos, we remember that some place can say that putting sugar into a hot beverage is a question of bishul. The sugar was already cooked and ain't bishul lacha bishul. But since we treat sugar like a liquid, because it liquefies, it's soluble, yesh bishul lacha bishul by a double ach. In other words, sugar can be identified as a double ach. So here's the question, a very powerful question, in fact. Tzemach Tzedek asked this. How does this eitzah that the Ravaz provide, how does it work? If you squeeze lemon onto salad or onto a fish, that is a bona fide eichel, and that legitimizes the act of squeezing. If you squeeze lemon into sugar, which can already be considered a mashka, but more so, you take that lemon-sugar combination and you put it into your tea, it becomes a liquid. At the end of the day, it was a liquid. It is a liquid, perhaps. So you have to explain that the Ravaz held, like we said before, at the initial stage, you squeeze it onto a food, get a shem of a food, because that's what it was. The fact that later something else changed is immaterial. But I should say that although the minig ha'olam always was, like Mishnah says, to squeeze lemon onto sugar is okay, but it's not as mutter as squeezing a lemon onto salad or onto fish, because here some look at the sugar as a potential liquid. Certainly, the fact that it's heading to the liquid might give it an identity as now as a liquid. But let's be clear. The original question of squeezing lemon onto a salad, that is basically a din hagamor. And even the Rabbeinu Hananel's objection was only by zeis and vanovim, not by lemons. Someone that wants to have a lemon, he doesn't have a lemon juice. He doesn't want to squeeze lemon right into the tea. Obviously, you don't want to do that. So he cuts the slice of lemon and puts it into a warm tea, not a hot tea, because that's a problem of bishul. Let's say the tea is a kli shlishi, kli revi. I'm not going to get into that. Some say even that could cook, but let's assume there's no question of bishul. It's not hot enough to bishul. Is that mutter? Because lamaisa, the lemon juice is extracted and goes into the tea. So here we have a concept where mashkin tezavu doesn't apply. Mashkin Shazavu is juice oozed out, and it achieved its own identity. Now it's a mashkin. That has a status of issa. But the lemon from the juice from the lemon never became its own identity and it was added. It went directly from the lemon into the tea. At no given time did it have a status of anything. It went from the lemon into the mashka. It was never lemon juice. It merged and it combined with the rest of the tea. This is a concept that you'll find in Shin Chaf Siv Beis, that if you put grapes into grape juice and the juice oozes out, that would be okay. Because it never had an identity of its own Shem Mashke, it merged with the other Mashke. So that's what the Paiskim say, and that's the truth is, that's why you're allowed to put ice cubes into a beverage, even though it's melting and it becomes a liquid. But since it merges before it has its own identity, it is discounted as far as Allah is concerned. Basically, as we see, we have to learn halacha properly, but when you learn halacha properly, it becomes lichtig. I should mention the Rabbi Yamin Zilban and Sefer B'Soilam, Shmir Shabbos says as well, don't take a spoon and squeeze the lemon against the side of the cup to extract the liquid. That would be a ma'isa sechita. Even though it's going into a mashke, but a ma'isa sechita is definitely us. Someone cut a pomegranate, and they are full of juice, and he produced a mashke. Can he enjoy that mashke? So that would be remind him. This is level number 2. Don't forget to remind him it's pomegranate. But then again, he wanted to just cut it to enjoy its fruit. So it was l'achila. Yes, it would be mutta to enjoy the juice that was produced, as long as his kavanah wasn't to produce a mashke. An interesting ha'ara I wanted to mention was someone told me about this concern. A moyel, typically by a milah, wants to give a child a little bit of the wine, the baby a little bit of the wine. As a school, it's also a sort of a painkiller. So he takes the cotton ball, puts it into the wine of the kais, and puts it in the baby's mouth. Is that a problem of sechita? The baby is sucking out the wine from the cotton ball. So the answer is, besides the fact that the baby is mamish 8 days old, but maybe safina b'yadayim, but that of course is incorrect, like we learned earlier. Sechita in the mouth is never a problem. So he puts the cotton ball in the baby's mouth, that's certainly not a problem. But I will say what is a problem, and many times the person doesn't realize that, he puts the cotton ball into the wine, but it has too much wine in it. He doesn't want to make the baby shikker, his own bris, so he squeezes out the cotton ball, and then he puts it in the baby's mouth. That's sechita, squeezing the cotton ball that has absorbed too much wine. So that's the problem. Squeezing a lemon into a dip. You want to get a little more flavor. So you have to know exactly the consistency of a dip, but typically a dip is not a mashke, it's an oichel, and that would have the same heter. Someone asked me an intelligent question that he wants to clean his hands. He had a terrible stain left from Erev Shabbos, and anybody knows anything knows that a lemon is a very good cleanser. In fact, just this morning I saw in my house, there was one of these dishwasher detergents, and it says citrus fruit used. Citrus fruits are a good cleanser. So the El Yerabah and Sifkat and Tezayin says to squeezing a fruit to produce juice to clean hands, the same issa. You're creating a usable mashka. Someone that eats a grapefruit, typically there's often juice remaining. So the Shmir Shabbos in Hey Yud Beis discusses, if you're allowed to do that, forget about the juice that remains. But by scraping out the fruit, you're producing a juice. So his basic heta is, besides the fact that you're not mechalik to make juice, which is a very beautiful analysis. Even when you're using a specially designed grapefruit spoon and you're producing juice, you're not producing plain juice. The juice that comes out merges and combines with the fruit of the grapefruit. So it would be, in a sense, better than soichet l'toich oichel. This is sort of using a grapefruit, eating it as an oichel with mashka. Rabbi Yashiv says it's better than squeezing it onto fruit. Here, he's not squeezing it all, he's just eating it. So yes, it is mutter to eat grapefruits, even though inevitably there's some juice that's being squeezed. And let me leave you with my version of fear kashas. 4 ha'aris that I'm just going to mention the ha'aris. I understand the Salem is a very intelligent, a very kishmaka oilam, and you like to hear a good ha'ara. Let me tell you 4 ha'aris. I will not get to the maskana. You'll discuss it between yourselves. Aisa shahaya. Someone was in the mood of freshly produced orange juice, but he was a lamdin. So he took an orange and banged it on all sides and, pretty much pushed it in. And then he made a little hole. He inserted a straw and sucked out this delicious, fresh orange juice. Is that mutter or not? Lamaisa, you'll say, he made juice, no doubt about it. And he did a maisa. He even squeezed the orange. Let's say he squeezed it. He squeezed it deliberately and with a vengeance. So he's making juice. But then again, at no given point did it have a din of juice. It was part of an orange. It was maybe better than mashka bolasay chaychel. That's the way we could look at it. And he never produced a mashka. He's sucking it out. That's going into his mouth. That we said is also mutter. The Orcha Shabbos in the Oralam Betes has a possible svara that since his tachlis is to make the juice when he's squeezing the orange, that might be worse. The heta is when you're squeezing a lemon that goes into food. Here he's squeezing it to make an oichel. Perhaps that would be mutter. Think about that. Question number 2, a beautiful shaila. Someone has a fruit juice. He made an exotic watermelon, cantaloupe, honeydew juice that halacha is probably mutter to make because it's shar peiros. Shar peiros, as we said, doesn't have a shem mashke. But he wants to add a little pizzazz to this drink. Listen to this. Can he squeeze a grape right into this juice? I'll say chas v'shalom. You're allowed to squeeze a grape onto food, not into mashke. This is a juice. So I saw in the Sefer Migdanis Eliyahu, he says, well, since the heta of making the shar mashkim juice is because it has been of an oichel, not a mashka. So if you have your Torah dika eyeglass, you look at this fruit, this melon juice, it's not a mashka, it's an oichel. Maybe you take the heta very literally, and squeezing a grape into this mashka is really squeezing onto an oichel. Or you might say it's a heta to squeeze it, but this is a juice. Think about that. A third question that I've heard more than once from a concerned younger man who's just recently become a father. His wife is nursing, and nursing obviously is important for the child. They started thinking that really nursing a child, this is also a form of sechita, no different than milking a cow. So during the week, it's wonderful to nurse. What's the heck with the nurse? A child on Shabbos, today that there are viable options as far as formula. Now, I'm not getting into the medical aspect. Is it a viable option or not? But assuming we have another option that's just as good, would that perhaps put a suffix if you're allowed to nurse when it's not necessary? And we find in a Gemara, it's also in Shulchan Aruch, Shin Chav Ches Lamed Gimel, the person that's ill, is allowed to nurse from an animal because that's his refuah, and b'makom Sarah like Gazu Rabbanim. We do see that a human being that's extracting milk from its source would be malacha. But let me tell you, the Heintige Pais can discuss this because again, today we have the many different types of formulas that might be a viable option. And at the end of the day, the Pais can say, if you want to nurse Avada, that's where the Bernshla made it. And we could have perhaps somewhat of an hezbollah. First of all, the fact that it goes from the mother directly into the child's mouth, it never at one point has an identity of a mashke. It would be similar to the heta of sucking. More than that, this milk, even though we call it milk, is the child's food. Maybe the milk, a mother's milk, has the status of an oichel, and therefore wouldn't be a problem of sechita at all. But the mice at the end of the day, are concerned about that. And the third kasha, my last question, a fascinating point. The Gemara, told you that story in the beginning of this Yid that innocently squeezed out grapes to make grape juice on Shabbos, and it was a Melacha D'Oraisa. I must tell you that there are two Rishonim that might legitimize that act. The Orchos Chaim, one of Rishon and Hilchos Kiddush Chav Beis, and the Rashbam Chelik Zayin Tov Kuf Chav Tes, they learned the Gemara in Bava Basra, Soichet Adam Eshkol Shalanovim. V'oimel of Kiddush Hayom, you're allowed to squeeze grapes on Shabbos and make Kiddush on Shabbos with that freshly squeezed grapes. Are you talking? This is Mamash Sachita D'Oraisa. So the Rashba says we're talking about that you're squeezing the grapes onto an oichel. Once you make it onto an oichel, it's mutter. So the Gemara is literal. You're allowed to make grape juice on Shabbos like that, you did. The only question is the logistics of it. What are you going to do? You're going to squeeze it onto breadcrumbs? You're going to make Kiddush on breadcrumbs? Besides that, it's not a liquid. Is that an appropriate beverage to make Kiddush on? So I was thinking, no, maybe you know what you'll do? You'll squeeze the grapes onto ice cubes, and that would be l'soich oichel. But it's not likely, because usually the mashka, the lemon juice, is a tuffle to the fish. Here, it's fakert. The lemon is the ikka, the grape juice is the ikka, and the ice cube is a tuffle. So what are we talking about? Squeezing it onto almonds? It's just not an appropriate concept. So I saw the Migdanis Eliyahu in a Tshuva Chelik Beis Kuf Gimel. This is a beautiful yesod. You'll squeeze it into breadcrumbs. Wait a little while until the grape juice rises, and then you can make Kiddush on that. Now again, that's not the most enticing food. But one thing he does add, listen to this, if the het to squeezing onto food is, it doesn't have a shem mashke, it's a shem oichel. So when you squeeze the grapes juice onto the food, maybe it's an oichel. You can't make Kiddush, you have to have a mashke, not an oichel. So to that he says, listen, lamaisa, if it's drinkable, it has a shem mashke and it's okay. So this is something to think about. Perhaps the Gemara meant it literally. Thank you all very much for listening.